go ahead and pull up the chat. So as Diane might be aware, there is a convention at Riot, and that is to use the Zoom chat as if it was Twitch chat. So I want everyone to open up the Twitch chat or the Zoom chat and just kind of post any sort of message in there that you're kind of thinking about. If you have a question about something I said, post it there. I'll take a look. If I pepega this this talk, go ahead and also put that in the chat. Cool. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, my name is Mark D. Ruyter. I currently work on build systems on Valorant for Riot Games. And this talk is kind of about my role at Riot and kind of overall what the development pipeline looks like for a AAA game studio. Title, as you can all see, building games better so devs can build better games. So some more background about myself. I graduated from UCR in 2016. While I was at UCR, I worked for Brain Game Center on a game called Recollect. For those of you who don't know, it's a still around mini game studio in, I believe it's in the UV, or at least it was when I worked there. There were a couple other games that they had, but Recollect was the only one that was like super cool from their perspective and was actively being used in a couple of studies. So I worked on that until, oh, nice. Yeah, I worked on that until Google went ahead and reached out to me and offered me a position. At the time, it was kind of hard to say no to the over double pay and the prestige of working at Google. So I went ahead and joined Google for 3.5 years. I worked on Android engineering productivity, which is a fancy way of saying CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery. It's just the way that we kind of build the platform and get the new versions of Android out there and tested before we release. So worked there for 3.5 years. During the pandemic, I decided to change jobs like most people did. And then I also got contacted by a friend of mine who was a coworker at Google to work on Valorant. And I was like, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'll go ahead and join. So I did. I've been there on the same team for about 2 years now, which, as I said before, was build systems. Also, I am on the GameSpawn Discord server. So if you want to reach out and tag me, I'm at admin settings. It's a bit of a troll username. I do not apologize. But yeah, feel free to tag me, ask any questions either about the talk, industry, or just whatever. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Valorant is a 5v5 tactical shooter. One shot, one kill. If it's a headshot for most weapons. It is very unforgiving, especially for new players, but it also has really high highs, which is why a lot of people are currently playing it. The esports scene is kicking off and growing pretty well. And the game is what we call a live service game. So it is continuously released every 2 weeks with more content, balance updates, more skins, more agents, more maps, all that other fun stuff. Yes, Vandal Reaver, best Vandal skin, I agree. I'm sorry for not having that on here. Couldn't find a sick image of it. Quick contents, blah, we're gonna skip that. We're just gonna go right into it. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about the IC roles for game studios. A lot of these you might already be familiar with, but some of this might just be a good refresher. So for those of you who don't know, IC stands for individual contributor. It just means anyone who's not a manager or producer. So artists, engineers, gameplay design, narrative, sound engineers, all of that is considered an IC role. Yeah, so at the base of every game is 2 roles, a game designer and a gameplay tech. yeah, so this is often combined into the same role, especially for indie studios. But for the sake of this talk, I'm going to split them. So a game designer is typically the person who kind of dreams big about what can be in the game, and the gameplay tech person is the person who implements those features to make that gameplay kind of come alive. So I'm going to go over a hypothetical example where we release, let's say the game designer comes up with an agent that's basically just Thresh or Pudge from League of Legends and Dota respectively. They want some agent that has a hook to be added to the game, right? So for those of you not familiar, if this agent then would throw out a hook, it would typically pull the agent into them. Maybe the gameplay designer wants to instead like grab the person's gun out of their hand when they get hit by a hook. So the gameplay tech person goes ahead and implements that feature, but also checks a bunch of edge cases, right? They might, be like, okay, well, what happens if they aim and hit a gun on the ground? Or what happens if they miss, right? Like, what should we do in those kinds of instances? So they go back and forth until they've found a cool little mechanic. And then now that they have this mechanic for this agent, they're ready to release it, right? Well, no. They need to make the agent fit in the world that is Valorant. Valorant is a very global IP, so it's important to make sure that we don't just make characters that kind of don't fit anything. We need to have them live and breathe in the actual world that is Valorant. So the game designer typically works with narrative to find where they kind of fit in this world. What's their background? What country are they from? What languages they speak? What's their goals? What's their motivations? What do they look like? And then the narrative and game design teams will work with the concept artist to kind of flesh those things out. After some back and forth, they'll send that out to 3D artists and sound engineers to kind of get the new agent kind of living and breathing. So after all that's done, we're ready to release the agent, right? Well, not really. We need to make sure that this agent is balanced. And we also need to make sure this agent isn't game breaking, right? So for balance, we have a team called the gameplay analysis team. It's basically a team of high-level players that are immortal and above that go ahead and test the agent before the agent gets released. Make sure that it doesn't feel bad to play against. Make sure that it feels good to play as. And we also have QA doing things like, oh, hey, maybe if what happens if I try to defuse the spike, which is the bomb in the game mode or in Valorant, while also like throwing my hook out first to pick up a weapon? Does that allow me to shoot while still defusing the spike? Maybe. Let's check that and make sure that it gets fixed. How many years of, yeah, what was the meme? 200 years or 2,000 years of game development experience? Pretty good. Yeah, so now that we have all this settled, we're ready to release the agent, right? Well, what happens if players find something that is game breaking on this agent? And for the record, this has probably happened on every agent that we've released, especially Yoru. It's happened multiple times for him. So if we do find out that this agent is broken in some way that skipped QA, how do we disable that, right? Also, does this new agent affect our performance numbers, right? Valorant servers run at 128 ticks a second. That means that we need very high performance servers or very high level of performance to make sure that the game can be played for the millions of players that play it. But also we need to make sure that the agent isn't taxing on the GPU or CPU. We need to make sure that people don't drop frames just because that agent shows up in their view or because somebody is playing as that agent. So yeah. Also, what about PvE, right? Typically, to prevent the first scenario, we release our characters on the PvE first to mitigate issues. Yeah, out of all of the roles here, there's no one that can kind of cover that. So what do we do? Also, in this case, this new agent happens to be Turkish, and Turkish fans absolutely love her. And now our servers in Turkey are max capacity. How do we spin up more servers, right? Again, none of these questions here can kind of be answered by anybody on this this group of ICs that have been listed below. And that's where DevOps comes in. So DevOps is short for developer operations. It just means a group of engineers that handle all of the monotonous or sometimes tedious problems that come with building a game for a live service game. So if you've talked with any game designer or game developer, you'll know that releasing a game is hard. Releasing a game 26 times a year is even harder, right? So to kind of prevent ICs from being burned out by that, Valorant and most AAA studios have a group of DevOps teams to kind of handle these problems for us. So to go back to this first one, how are we going to disable an agent if players find a game-breaking bug? We have a live services team that kind of handles this. There's a bunch of flags that we can pass to the server to basically say, hey, don't allow people to pick this agent. It's currently broken. Some of you who've played might have noticed those messages also appearing in the UIs before you kick off the game. So this live service team handles all of that. For performance, we have a dedicated performance team. So they currently handle things like making sure that when we are developing the agent, the server tick rate doesn't decrease. They also keep track of various performance metrics on different builds. They'll work with QA to make sure that the different machines that players typically have all still run perfectly fine. And they'll even work to make sure that our performance numbers go up, as some of our recent patches have done. So releasing for PEE, this is typically handled by the release and build teams. We'll make a special release just for PBE to make sure that we can kind of get additional changes out while also having the PBE up and running for players to test. And for when our servers, are on fire because there's so many people, we will typically contact our core services team to kind of handle that. A lot of this is done automatically now, where they kind of have thresholds where we hit a certain number of servers and then it'll instantly spin things up in AWS or GCP for us. AWS being Amazon Web Services and GCP being Google Cloud Platform, two various cloud technologies to kind of help that scale. So does anyone have any questions about this before I get into the next section?
How do they like, how quickly does communications go through each other when they're talking?
Yeah, right. So you're asking like, how long do these like edges between groups take? It really depends on the working relationship teams have. Typically, people work pretty closely with one another. We set up meetings pretty dynamically. There is no kind of like waterfall scenario. If you're familiar with development practices, we use Agile. So we typically will set up meetings that are like maybe only a day in advance for some things, and then just kind of like all hop in and work on problems together that way. Game design, narrative are usually like best buddies for like a week or two, just to kind of like hammer out some ideas for new agents when that sort of thing happens. So like they'll be working pretty closely. We have the same building, so when people are not working from home, you kind of just have those conversations organically. But yeah, we expect people to operate pretty fast on these types of workflows when when they come up. So we don't always, create an agent, but when an agent is in the pipeline, right, we make sure that these teams are collaborating together with each other. Bringing in, where do I fall in this diagram? So as I mentioned before, I also help with PBE, but I will get into a place where it's even more questions than just this, and I will fall into that. How long does that IC loop usually take? That will be answered in the next section. Great question. Bringing ideas to the table, releasing character on. Right. So ideas for characters don't always pan out immediately. Sometimes we have characters in the works for over a year. For instance, Yoru has gone through, I think, 3 iterations. Originally, he had his fake out clone that he has now. He had that, it got removed, and then it got added back even after launch. So agents are constantly being shifted around. Game designers will typically come up with cool abilities, and then those abilities will be tested on various kits, usually together, but sometimes we'll icebox, forgive the pun, one of the agent abilities and put it on another agent when we find that it fits them. So yeah, there's no set timeline for idea to getting onto the PBE, but yeah, when we do find something that works, it's typically pretty quick once the rest of this pipeline goes through. So once game design has kind of like nailed down, yes, this kit is like something that we really want. It's surprisingly fast how long it takes to get through narrative, art, sound eng, and verification and stuff. I think, yeah, trying to look back at what agents were recently released. I think Chamber as an agent was pretty quick. We didn't go through much additional like changes that Yuri did. I think it was a couple of months that it took. Keep in mind that there's multiple agents usually in the pipeline, so yeah, there's always something to do while kind of waiting on that. Oh, right, Fade. Yeah, she was the most recent. Her kit wasn't changed very much. She was probably around in development for about 4 months once the basics of her kit were together, and most of that was like making sure that voiceover, art, visuals were good, that sort of thing. Balance usually gets into this conversation earlier than the art being fully fleshed out. Thresh agent incoming. I wish. I'll pitch the idea, but the more I talk about it in preparing this, the more I like it. So yeah, this isn't a leak. If it does happen, that's because you guys inspired me to really push this idea going forward. Okay, so development workflows. In other words, how long does the IC loop typically take? So this is the IC loop of making changes to when it actually gets released. Wow, what a great segue. So typically, the ICs will make changes on their local workstation. They'll spin up the game locally, try a couple of things, see how they like it. And once they are comfortable with something, they'll put the changes into the build. They'll submit them in Perforce and GitHub. We'll then verify the changes in a clean environment. So we'll build the game from scratch. We'll run some tests against it. And then once that's ready, we'll put it up for an internal patch to be played on playtests. And then once that looks good, we'll do a bunch of boring things to create a new patch, to get it ready for players, to update our servers. And then we'll press a release button called the big red button to actually get it into players' hands. Some more movement agents. Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, making changes. I'm kind of breaking this down into discipline. So we have 3 major disciplines: artists, engineers, or in this case we just call game, and services. So For artists, we typically use Maya, Photoshop, and ZBrush. We don't use Blender just because we don't have a lot of tooling that we've already made for Blender. Maya has been around for a bit in our developments. Keep in mind that the game's been in development for 7.5 years at this point. So some previous early tooling in Maya kind of stuck around, and we've been using that ever since. Once people have made the changes in their tool of choice, though, they then submit them into Perforce. For the game, we do have a custom version of the Unreal Engine. So currently, right now, the version we have is 4.25, but we've made some changes on top of that to kind of work for our workflows. If you're working on indie games, you never really have this kind of luxury because it's honestly more painful than it is useful if you're in a small team. But when you end up releasing a game as often as we do, it's usually important to kind of clean up the small things that trip you up every time that you go to build and release the game. So we've put custom code inside of the engine to make those flows easier for us. 30 minutes. Oh, I guess you haven't seen. Well, I'll talk about this, but the engine no longer takes 30 minutes to compile. Actually, what a great segue, because we now compile the game and the engine with FastBuild. FastBuild is a distributed and cached build system. You can think of it kind of like Make, but with a couple of extra abilities. It can push changes to multiple machines at the same time, and have those machines build it and set it back to the original person who kicked off the build. And it also has a cache that basically allows previous builds to save their results. So if someone else goes and builds that same exact thing, it'll just check the cache for an already built result, resulting in the compile times to be much, much faster. So the engine is now down to about 7 minutes from 30. Yeah, so when people are done with their changes, they submit them back to Perforce. For services teams, they don't touch Perforce at all. They actually work in GitHub, in Git, and they write their code in Golang. So services are anything that is in the game, but not gameplay. So this is kind of like your voice abilities. This is like text, friends, your skin shop, all of these things that are kind of in the game, but not really the gameplay. Those are in separate services. So yeah, they have a separate GitHub repo for that. It's not in Perforce, but that's kind of okay, because typically we often have two versions of the game running at the same time, right? We release globally, but we release in kind of a release rolling window. So if I remember correctly, Korea gets the build 16 hours after the EU does. So we have two versions of the build running at the same time, two versions of the game running at the same time. And when we go to update the game, we need to make sure that all of the services that we have work for both versions at the same time. So having it separate actually isn't that bad of an idea, because it allows us to easily test the services against both versions of the game. Okay, so next step here is verifying the changes. So that's building the game, running tests in a clean environment. To do that, we use a couple of technologies. We use AWS. As I mentioned previously, it's Amazon Web Services. Specifically, we use Amazon's EC2, Elastic Compute 2 features. We don't automatically spin things up. We have some dedicated machines that are kind of always on in the cloud, just kind of waiting for builds to come in, and then building them, and then sending the results back. We use Jenkins to orchestrate this. Jenkins is a CI/CD tool that basically allows you to orchestrate a lot of different machines to do the same task or the same set of tasks. Yeah. We also use C# for actually performing those tasks on each machine, just because it's a familiar language for a lot of people. It's used in Unreal Engine for its build services. And overall, it's just a nice language to use. Buddy builds, I can get into that, but I don't have anything on buddy builds. So I will talk more about verifying changes later, but yeah. Finally, after those changes have been built and we put them into an internal patch line, internal patching service, we then go ahead and playtest the build. So Tuesdays, Thursdays, we have a dedicated playtest hour for everybody to kind of just hop in, frag out, bottom frag if you're not having a good day, it happens. But yeah, this is to get feedback on a lot of different changes and just to get play hours in to make sure that we don't run into a lot of common bugs. And also, as a designer, it's really hard to expect how your players will top frags get promotions. Yeah. As a designer, it's hard to expect how players will end up using or perceiving your changes. So it's important to get feedback immediately on the changes you've made to make sure that ultimately it lands well with your players. So every day we also have a daily playtest of high elo players. I think it's currently plat and above. They also give feedback to game designers directly about their various changes that they're making. So yeah, those are pretty much mission critical to have playtests. It sounds like people are goofing off, but spending that hour a day getting these results is incredibly important to making sure the game is ultimately good when we ship it. Okay, so yeah, does anyone have any questions about this pipeline here? I know I didn't go over create patch, but honestly, that's boring stuff and you guys probably don't want to hear it. So I'm not going to do that one. Cool. Sounds like there are no questions. So I'm going to continue on to what I do. Yeah. So I'm on a team called Build Systems, and as you can imagine, we handle a lot of the build. Specifically, we've been spending a lot of time on making the build faster. So I mentioned earlier that the build was 30 minutes for the Unreal editor, and it's now down to 7. We made that work by switching our build system from Incredibuild to FastBuild. This was in development for, I want to say 8 months. Originally, we expected it to be around a 4-month operation, but things got complicated. Unreal Engine 4 is not a very friendly engine, to say the least, when it comes to its internals. So yeah, it took us a lot longer to get there, but we did get there. Yeah, so we made that migration. We also did some optimizations for caching the results of builds. So for those of you who haven't used Unreal, it has something called the DDC, the Derived Data Cache. And basically what this is just a set of built assets for a game. So for instance, if you have a shader, you need to compile the shader for multiple different GPUs, right? So if you want a game to land on Android, you need to compile it with a specific compiler to get it into Vulkan. If you want to have the same shader work on iOS, you need to compile it for Metal. If you want it working on Windows, you need to compile it for DirectX, and so on. So doing all of that work is very expensive, but if you cache the results ahead of time, you can skip a lot of that work. It brings the game's build down from approximately 7 hours to, I think currently it takes 45. So yeah, we did some optimizations there to basically improve the way that this cache appears for different machines. So we sync the cache down to every machine in the build farm. We have 120 machines building the game. And then we also allow developers to sync the build cache to their machines directly. So once a build has been built remotely, it can now be built locally also much quicker. We actually have a couple more than 120. Some of them are down at the moment due to some wacky compiler issues, but I'll get around to fixing that. Yeah, so yeah, you're here again. Yeah, other things about developer workflows. So developers have been working from home a lot, as you can imagine, from the pandemic. So we've done a couple of things to improve workflows there. Typically, when you're on VPN, that means that your network speed is much slower than if you're on public internet. So trying to sync from Perforce or from GitHub takes a while. We basically created a tool that allows you to authorize yourself over VPN, but then do the actual sync over public internet, which speeds up sync times by, in some cases, up to 20x. So that was a huge improvement for our users. We also made it so users can specify that they want builds to be synced at a specific time of the day. So if they know they're going to start at like 10 a.m., they can set it to sync at 9, and then all of those changes will be ready for them in the morning. Yeah, and we also opened up fast build to distribute builds from a work from home environment. So kind of being able to talk to all those 120 machines to get fast build to build the results for you remotely and then send them back when they're ready. So yeah, so back to the editor taking 30 minutes. This timeline here above is kind of just a breakdown of all the various parts of the build and how long everything approximately takes from start to finish. So this really poor red line kind of shows what we call the critical path. It's just everything that we need to wait for before starting the next set of tasks. And in this case, the editor was taking about 20 minutes here. It's a little faster on the farm than local because we can distribute it easier because we have a better connection. But regardless, it was taking about 20 minutes. And after we moved over to fast build, the editor is now slower or faster than some of the other targets. So that gap between when the editor completes and when we're able to actually start building the game is much smaller. Yeah, so that saved us quite a bit of time there. Another thing that we do is we make developer workflows better by introducing some Slack bots. Riot is absolutely obsessed with using Slack. We pretty much don't use email. I never check mine. And sometimes that's bad because I miss important emails, but they could have just sent it to me on Slack. So whatever, that's their fault. But yeah, when you go to make a build, we now have these live notifications of approximately where the build is at, what's still being done, who submitted a change that is being built on this build for the first time. And we also have notifications for when the build completes, when the build breaks, as well as some extra logs for when the build breaks so people know approximately what the issue is without having to open up the logs and kind of poke around. Also, when the build's complete, it will push the changes to the patcher, and you get this nice little notification that the patch is ready for you when it's ready for you. So we built a lot of internal tooling to make it easier for devs to know when they can kind of kick off that playtest, or they can continue with their work and not have to worry about their changes potentially breaking the build and so on. Does anyone have any questions?
Typically, how many Slack bots do you have in like a Slack channel or server?
We have a lot. So just the build team alone, we have a Slack bot for creating our tickets of like people making requests for work that we can do. So if somebody is like, hey, I want a nice quick way to be able to push this patch to what we call our lab patch lines. patch lines just is any linear version of a patch. So if you're like, you know, the PBE is a patch line. It's separate. It's a separate line from the live service game, right? So if they're like, hey, I want an easy way to like make this branch in our code push to this patch line, they would like put that in our Slack channel and react with an emoji, and then it gets created as a ticket in Jira, and also it gives them some relevant information that might already exist for what they're asking for, and ping the build team for expertise on that. That's just one of them. There's these Slack bots. We have another Slack bot for creating what we call epics in Jira. It's basically just a series of it's basically just a series of tickets in Jira. We have Slack bots for when the build breaks so hard that the Slack bot doesn't trigger. So we have some meta Slack bots too. Yeah, I think we have about 5 that are like actively supported for our team early, or for our team alone. But across all of Riot, other teams have Slack bots pretty much everywhere. Yeah, bye Ethan, thanks for coming. This will be recorded, so don't worry about missing it. Any other questions?
I believe Will asked, is this technology intuitive or did it take some getting used to?
The Slackbot technology?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it's fairly intuitive. Once you get over the initial understanding of what Slack kind of is, the API for Slack is give me some JSON, and if the JSON is properly formatted as a message, then I will make a message that is exactly that. There's a Slack bot or a Slack block API builder kit that you can find online. It's pretty easy. You kind of just paste some stuff into the editor there, and then once that looks good, you kind of copy and paste it and put it into your code. Yeah, it has a nice little live view of what that JSON looks like, and you can kind of drag and drop things into it. So I think it's pretty intuitive. Yeah, it's a super useful tool, and I wish Discord had something like it. Do other game teams have similar build workflows to Val, or is it pretty game specific? Good question. So a lot of our workflows are Val only, but a lot of teams do have similar things. This patch line thing, for instance, on the bottom here, Legends of Runeterra, the card game that League has, or that Riot has, also has similar notifications. I don't believe that they have live notifications like this one. We have discussed with a team that's called Cortec about putting this in for other various games. A lot of people have expressed interest in it, especially other teams that had users that or developers that were once a part of Valorant, but then moved to like either R&D teams or other games. They've been kind of looking for this sort of thing. So we're hoping that we can share this, and at the very least, like share the kind of knowledge of how to get it working. But that's a good question. Yeah, any other questions? You can ask anything about the talk or anything about like game development in general, anything about what I do. Best gun buddy, I don't know.
Yeah, so this is an open floor. Anybody feel free to ask any questions. I do have a couple questions myself, but I'll let everybody speak first if you have some.
I knew it was coming. So now that it's been asked, I'm now going to go back in the history and find everybody who asked a question before "Can I have your Riot Gun Buddy" was asked, and they will all get Riot Gun Buddies. Yes, it's happening. Coolest thing I did on build systems. I'm really proud of these live notifications. When it came out, I actually put a couple of Easter eggs in there. So if you look at the clock emoji on these notifications, you'll notice that it approximately matches the ETA. Oh, actually, no, this is a recording of before I did that. But I did make it round the ETA time to the nearest emoji. And I thought that was really fun. Yeah, so that was this was a lot of fun. Moving over to fast build when it finished was super satisfying. Yeah. I don't know if you can talk about patches in Valorant. Okay, so I can't really talk too much about Valorant's patch system. We share the same patching tech as all of Riot Games, and it's probably one of the coolest ways of tackling I've seen. Without getting into too many details, we kind of take the game, split it up into its existing files, look at the files, see how we can, I guess, take that file and convert it into chunks that make sense for being patched. Then only save those patches or those chunks comparing against the previous version of the game, and then apply just those chunks on top of the game. So you can patch any two versions of the game, whether or not they're related. So if you took the PBE version of the game, for instance, and you took live, and you kind of just update it from one to the other, it would work despite them being not from the same exact code base or code line, right? When we go to release PBE, it's usually we freeze it with different content than what we'd have on the live version of the game. But you can patch between the two. It's a pretty cool system. It doesn't really rely on a lot of the setbacks that other patching systems require. How closely do you as a programmer work with data scientists? Yeah, so for build systems, all of our data is internal. Unfortunately, that means that we don't get dedicated data science resources to our team. But I will say that back when my team was also a part of the performance team, we were a very small team back then. The performance team did work quite a bit with the data science teams. I think we had quite a bit of like, okay, what is the best way moving forward? How do we take Valorant and make it a more performant game that gets like better results, not just like better metrics, but better end results for players, right? So we did a lot of work analyzing what GPU and CPU combinations exist out there. And then we started targeting the most popular sets of those when we decided which changes we need to make first, right? Because a lot of times when you're a developer, you will find a lot of work that can be done, but prioritization of which work needs to be done first is hard because it's hard to tell what the actual end result will finally look like. But with data science helping you, you get a better approximation of what your changes will land as. So yeah, there's a lot of work with that kind of happens with data science teams. Unfortunately, I don't get to interact with them much because our systems are all internal, so it doesn't negatively impact players in the same way that things like performance does. Is there a LinkedIn that we can connect with you? I have not updated my LinkedIn since I joined Google, so I do have a LinkedIn. It's just my name, but it's yeah, it's pretty outdated. I don't really check it. How are new programmers brought into the main team? Yeah, so it's never a good idea to take on a programmer and just let them run free in the game because there are so many systems and the game is so big that it's kind of hard to take all that in as a new programmer. Typically, you have like a small project that introduces you to a bunch of your team's core systems. And then slowly over time, you'll either find yourself as a new programmer, like fighting fires, fixing bugs, and that slowly expands your purview of like what you're familiar with the code base with. So it's kind of on your manager to make sure that you don't see the full picture and then get scared. But yeah, whenever starting on a big project, it's best to kind of limit scope as much as possible, because before even writing your first line of code, you're going to be hit with so many different acronyms, so many different systems, and it's going to be hard to keep track of all of that, while also like seeing everybody else's, right? Like that was just the acronyms your team uses, and being exposed to everybody else's is just a lot. So yeah, narrow scope and then slowly expand scope when the engineer is feeling comfortable. Was I the one behind the arcane Easter eggs? No. Sorry. I wish I had time to kind of do that. Sort of related data science aspect. How many aspects of working workflow that use ML AI to streamline it, make it more efficient? So ML doesn't really, and AI don't really have a strong place in a lot of build systems and DevOps work yet. There's a lot of talk about it in bigger companies that can kind of spend the what's called headcount to do that, right? A lot of the times it's best to just hire an engineer to also join the team of the team that you're trying to make better, rather than hire some AI ML engineers to try to solve the problem using AI. Typically, using AI to change workflows is a bit scary, because if you come up with solutions that people aren't ready for, or people don't fully understand yet, it can cause a lot of churn, I guess, in the way that's handled, right? You basically want to make sure that your developers always have the same workflows, and when you change workflows, you do it deliberately and in a way that is easy to migrate to. With a lot of proposed AI systems, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to make these changes, and then we're going to come up with a slightly different version of that. You kind of have to adapt, and engineers and ICs in general don't like adapting very often. So you need to be really deliberate about those sorts of changes. If working in the game development is our goal, would you recommend jumping straight to game dev after graduation, or would you try to find general software development job first? My route was very interesting. Keep in mind, I don't actually work on game development in the same way that everybody else kind of perceives game development. So I wouldn't call myself a game developer. But yeah, I will say that if you don't spend the time after graduation working on games, it's very hard to get into the game industry. My knowledge of games from being a part of GameSpawn and working on game side projects for a couple of years, both before and after graduating, is still rusty. I probably wouldn't have an easy time passing a game development job interview. So I would say that if your goal is to do game development, you should be working on game development at the very least as a side project for your entire time you're at your other company. I will say though that working at FANG companies, or I guess they call them manga now, working at manga companies, that sounds wrong. No, working at FANG companies definitely comes with a boost to your pay that you otherwise wouldn't really see at most game development studios. If that's something that you absolutely need, I do recommend taking that route. But if you're comfortable, going for a small game studio is a perfectly valid route, and I have a couple of friends who have gone that route, and it's worked out for them. So yeah, it's hard to get into bigger game studios as a game developer because they typically just require more experience. They're generally a more prestigious group, and therefore they can be a bit more picky about who they hire. But regardless, yeah, I would say if that's your goal, focus on game development. Honestly, the skills that you have as a generic developer for FANG companies will be transferable from game development, but it's not as transferable the other way, right? Just because there's so much specific knowledge for game development, like nav meshes and shaders, and you know, a lot of subsystems just don't exist for other development workflows. When you first joined Riot, how was the work culture from Google to a AAA? Okay, so this one I was kind of surprised about, and my now team manager or team lead told me this, and I was like, I don't know if that's actually true. But you know, being at Riot now for a while, yeah, I found that it is true. But anyway, at Google, it seemed like there were two big problems. Everyone was kind of there to like promote themselves, right? To like further advance their career. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it felt definitely more corporate than I would have liked. Sometimes there was a lot of butting of heads, right, between like different teams to make priorities land in the way that were needed. But yeah, a lot of times it ended up feeling like, oh, this person's doing this, and we're giving it to this person because this person is going to get promoted, right? At Riot, so far it hasn't felt that way. I feel like all projects are, hey, we're releasing this, and we need to release this because that's, you know, the right thing to do. So that's what we're going to do. And teams typically work together a whole lot more than they did at Google. I think that comes with just the fact that we can all fit in the same building. At Google, teams were absolutely massive, and that wasn't always the case. And it was very easy to kind of disregard somebody on online, like messaging each other or like through email, because you know that's not really what you see every day. But I feel like teams at Riot work a lot more closely together with one another, and it definitely improves the overall work experience. But outside of like working relationships between teams, it very much feels the same. It's the same kind of like, hey, we're going to cover you with, you have like free food, you have great benefits, you have all this nice stuff. You're expected to work, you know, the same way, treat people with respect, that sort of thing. It you know, day to day feels good working there. It's just the way that teams kind of operate is different, and I really like that about Riot. So, most surprising community response to a new update or release. Yeah, I think the total momentum behind Neon's release was like it lasted a lot longer than I expected it to, right? The character is great. The music video for it was really good. I still listen to that song on repeat all the time. Yeah, so I think that character in general, just the total hype around it, and the fact that the hype didn't die after release, was really cool to see. So yeah, I'll go with that one. Okay, do game designers also program prototype gameplay mechanics? Yes, game designers and gameplay tech is a fluid role. You can be both, right? I've only split them just to kind of talk about them from a high level, I guess. You can definitely wear multiple hats, and a lot of people at Riot wear multiple hats. So yeah, if you want to do both, you absolutely can. Don't worry about that. What is my rank in Valorant? Currently, my live rank is Silver 3. Might be Gold 1. My internal rank though is Gold 3. So I'm definitely better during playtests than I am during playing with my friends. Office politics, yeah, office politics. How is work-life balance? Work-life balance is something that's really up to everybody else to hold themselves accountable for. Yeah, we don't have crunch the same way that other companies have crunch, because if we miss a release window, just wait 2 weeks and it'll get released eventually. So yeah, there's no real crunch that way. Sometimes it does feel like there's a lot of pressure to get things out the door though, because it definitely hurts to see players like complain about, we're not, working on a replay system, or we're not working on like these other things that they've really wanted for a while. And that was recently a pretty big thing on Reddit, at least. So like there is some pressure to like, work harder. Yeah. In terms of work-life balance things, for me personally, I probably work too hard. My manager is constantly telling me like, hey, it's been a couple of months since you've taken some days off. You should take some days off. I have a really cool manager though, and I have scheduled some time off because of that. So, yeah. Oh, Riot has a unlimited PTO policy, but that does often mean that it's hard to track how much PTO you haven't taken. Yeah. So be aware of that if you ever hear that that phrase, and also try to keep yourself accountable to taking off enough time. Usually you want to aim for about 3 to 4 weeks a year. Alpha male grind set. Okay. Do you ever get to work with the other teams, such as the LoL, TFT, or cinematic teams? On build, we typically don't work with those teams, especially across IPs. League of Legends has a build system based off of Unreal Engine 3. It doesn't really translate very well to Unreal Engine 4. TFT, their build team needs a lot of help, so they occasionally reach out and we talk. But yeah, it's very difficult to create a system that works for both, just because the game engine that we use is just so specific that it's hard to make tools generic enough across games. Another one, Legends of Runeterra uses Unity instead of Unreal Engine or any variant of that. And they also use Git instead of Perforce, so a lot of the tooling is just completely different. Yeah, it's hard to work across game boundaries where the technology is different, but where the technology is similar, we try to align on those strategies. We've been getting better at coming up with things before they actually do get to the point where they can diverge. We have a couple of teams that are responsible for core technology that we check in with every couple of weeks to make sure that we're not duplicating some work that someone else did.
Oh, I just wanted to mention real fast. We're at about an hour. It's 5:03. So yeah, just wanted to let you know that before like continuing on past the hour. So
Yeah,
if
no,
you're fine with continuing with questions, like we're happy to stay here. Just a heads up.
yeah, thanks. I'm gonna go ahead and finish out these questions here, and then I'll let you guys message me on Discord, and also write down names for gun buddies. So Donovan, I'm gonna need your help with getting gun buddies to Riot usernames. Okay, so Chris asked, how do you guys ensure that when a patch is rolling out, it doesn't break some other aspect of the game unexpectedly? Okay. So this is primarily handled by QA. So this isn't necessarily the patch itself, but kind of just doing iterative changes, making sure that previous things don't break. We do have set test suites. So our QA standing for quality assurance teams, will basically have a run book of, if anything ever changes in this section of the game, these are all the tests that we need to run to make sure that it works, right? Every time that we release a new skin for a gun, we always make sure that it has the same suite of like, okay, if the gun is like pointing towards a wall and we're standing right next to the wall, does it clip through the wall? Do the shaders work at different angles? Are there any gaps in the guns, like what's that called? Geometry, to and stuff like that. When we go to update maps, we do similar passes. We make sure that the nav mesh in places like Omen can teleport to aren't broken. We run a bunch of suites like that, but occasionally, yeah, things do kind of leak through. And that's just the result of video games being incredibly complex. Yeah. One of those complexities, right? Like, as I said before, we make sure that Omen can't like teleport out of the map. Every time that we change the map, we make sure that his teleport positions are correct, I guess. But then when you combine that with a character like Sage, who can create walls, he can then teleport into some spots and then either cancel the teleport to land in a different spot outside of the game and stuff like that. And that's not really something that is easy for QA to kind of account for, because it's two wildly different systems that interact in such a weird way that, yeah, a bug does end up slipping through and get unnoticed. So yeah. Did I miss any other questions? I see a lot of gun buddy spam.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Sounds like everybody wants a gun buddy.
Yeah, looks like that we cleaned out questions.
What happens when things leak through? Yeah. So yeah, we typically try to disable the character if it's character specific first. If it's map specific, we'll disable the map. And then typically over the next day or two, we'll work on a hot patch or a hot fix and then patch that immediately. So you'll notice that the game typically updates every other Tuesday, but then occasionally you'll just get like a small update that takes a couple of seconds before you can play the game, and that's us putting out hot fixes to prevent these kinds of things from happening. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure on devs when they do need to make a hot fix, but we do try to give people time by having our live services team handle disabling the character and things like that. We also have some people work on the our messaging on like Twitter and other services to kind of handle the situation and prevent people from being too upset. Who do they decide should work on the hot fixes? So typically the hot fix is either worked on by the person, usually the person who has the most knowledge of that area, right? Hot fixes mostly result from a bug that got passed through rather than a completely new exploit that was found. So someone who worked on those changes in the last 2 weeks, because that's our weekly release cadence, will hop in there and kind of fix those things. The stuff that they were working on already is still working on main. So I guess I didn't go over this too much, but we basically have a branching structure where every time that we go to make a release, we freeze the code base so that no new changes go in there besides hot fixes and patches that QA have determined need to go through. So we have a system that allows us to continue to work on our next change, but also if we need to make that hot fix, we make it on our main branch, and then we copy it over into our release branch. Yeah, no problem, Christopher. Okay, cool. I think that's everything. And we are 10 minutes over time. Luckily, you guys don't have a room that you're getting kicked out of, so that's cool. Yeah, I am still available on Discord, of course. Reach out to @admin settings. Feel free to ask pretty much whatever question. I'll be around to answer questions for the next couple of days. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with our clubs.
Yeah,
Ooh.
no problem. All right. Is there a way
yeah.
I can copy chat?
There should be like a chat.